She won't make it out of the jungle. Leave her. Zollner pressed 2 fingers against the map and didn't look up. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who had already filed the decision and moved on. She's compromised the timeline. We extract now or we don't extract at all. No one in the room argued. That was the thing about Zollner. Not that he was right, that he made argument feel like insubordination. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance had been lying face down in 6 inches of standing water for 11 minutes when she heard the boats leave. She didn't move. That was training, pure training, the kind that holds even when everything else is coming apart, when your shoulder is dislocated and your radio is dead, and the water you're lying in smells like rotten diesel, and something she didn't want to identify. She held still and she counted. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 60. Then she turned her head, very slowly, and listened to the river. The boats were gone. Vance was 31 years old, 6 years in the United States Army, 2 deployments before this one, and a marksman qualification score that had made her first range instructor stop mid-sentence, look at his clipboard, look at her, and say nothing for 4 full seconds. Not because he didn't have words. Because the words he had weren't the ones a person says out loud on a training range in front of a company. She had a dislocated shoulder. She knew it without testing it. The angle was wrong, the weight of her arm wrong, and when she'd gone down into the water, she'd felt the socket give in that specific awful way that is unmistakable once you've felt it once. She'd felt it once before. Left shoulder, Fort Bragg, a training exercise that had gone sideways in the rain. She'd reduced it herself in a bathroom 15 minutes later and told the medic she'd slipped. She was going to have to do the same thing now. She did it against the root system of a submerged mangrove, using the tree the way her body remembered, using the doorframe. 1 breath, 2. On the 3rd, she applied the angle and the pressure, and the world went white for about 3 seconds. And then the socket was seated and her arm was hers again, and she pressed her face into the water and held the sound in until it wasn't a sound anymore. Then she sat up, cleared her rifle, and started thinking. The target was Logistics Depot 7, not a glamorous name. The kind of name that made people assume it was a secondary priority, a support objective, something you folded into a larger operation without giving it its own line on the briefing slide. That assumption was wrong, and Vance had known it was wrong since the first time she'd seen the satellite imagery. Depot 7 wasn't storing food or equipment or spare vehicle parts. It was the coordination hub for 3 separate supply chains feeding armed factions across a 60-kilometer radius. Whoever controlled Depot 7 controlled the logistics of everything happening in this theater for the next 4 months. Her unit's objective had been reconnaissance. Get eyes on the depot's security configuration. Count vehicles, count personnel, identify the communication setup, relay coordinates, extract. Simple. The kind of mission that gets briefed in 20 minutes and runs clean if everyone does their job. The ambush had been waiting for them at the river crossing. She'd known something was wrong 15 seconds before it started. The birds. The absence of birds. In a jungle that was never fully quiet, a silence that complete meant something had disturbed the canopy. Something large moving through it, not them. She'd been opening her mouth to say so when the first shot crossed the water and Specialist Tran went down on her left. What followed was 7 minutes of controlled chaos. Her unit had trained for ambush response. They'd run the drills. The drills had not accounted for the accuracy of the opposing fire, which was not the pattern of militia irregulars. That was precision. That was someone who knew where to point. She'd taken down 2 of the shooters from the far bank before the second wave hit the rear element. By then, Lieutenant Zollner had already made his calculation. She'd heard it in the radio traffic before she'd heard his voice directly. Variable lost. We move. Variable. That was what she'd been. A variable in someone else's equation. She pulled herself out of the water and assessed. Her rifle was functional. Her sidearm was functional. She had 1 spare magazine for each. Her field kit was largely intact, which meant her medical supplies were intact, which meant the shoulder was going to be manageable if she kept the joint warm and didn't ask it to do anything dramatic. Her radio was dead. Her GPS was dead. She had a paper map in a waterproof sleeve in her left cargo pocket because she had always carried a paper map in a waterproof sleeve. And the men in her unit had made exactly the kind of comments about that habit that men make about habits they consider excessive until the moment those habits save someone's life. She looked at the map. She looked at where she was. She looked at where Depot 7 was, 2.3 kilometers northeast. She thought about what Zollner had said, variable lost. She thought about the word variable, and about the specific kind of thinking that produces it, not tactical thinking, accounting. The kind of mind that looks at a human being and sees a column in a ledger, and when the column becomes complicated, marks it closed and moves on. She started moving northeast. The jungle at night is not dark the way rooms are dark. It is layered. There are levels of visibility that shift depending on canopy density and cloud cover and how long your eyes have had to adjust. Vance had been adjusting for 6 years. She moved through the underbrush the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance, never forcing, never breaking cover, stopping every 4 minutes to listen to what the jungle was telling her. What it was telling her, 30 minutes in, was that she was not alone. The patrol she'd picked up was moving parallel to her, slightly west, 2 men by the sound of it. Not following her, they didn't know she was there. They were running a perimeter route, which meant she was close enough to Depot 7 that they'd established a patrol perimeter, which meant the satellite imagery had underestimated the security footprint. She marked that, updated her internal map, kept moving. She'd been running what her first tactics instructor called the 3-question loop since she'd climbed out of the water. What do I have? What do I need? What's the first step? Not survival math. She'd learned early that survival math had a way of producing answers you didn't want to act on. She ran objective math instead. The objective was still the objective. The fact that she was running it alone with a dislocated shoulder that she'd just relocated and a dead radio didn't change the objective. It changed the method. She counted her assets the way she counted ammunition, precise, unsentimental. She had her rifle, her sidearm, her field kit, her map, and 6 years of training that had been repeatedly tested and had not yet found its limit. She had a dislocated shoulder that was currently cooperating. She had a jungle that was more familiar to her than it was to the men who'd built that depot. She had the particular advantage of being a variable that someone had decided wasn't worth tracking. Nobody watches the asset they've already written off. Depot 7 came into view through the tree line at 0047 hours. It was larger than the imagery. Not dramatically larger, but enough to matter. The vehicle count was higher by 3, 2 of which were covered transports that hadn't appeared in any of the photos. The communications array on the eastern building was newer than the intel suggested. She noted all of it, filed it, kept cataloging. The guard rotation was sloppy. Not incompetent, but sloppy in the particular way that happens when soldiers have been running the same route for long enough that the route has become automatic and automatic has become invisible. They were walking their posts without seeing them. She tracked 3 separate cycles before she moved. What she needed was the communications room. Not to destroy it, not yet, to use it. If she could get a transmission out, she could relay everything she'd gathered, the vehicle count, the expanded footprint, the grid coordinates that Zollner had extracted without confirming. She could complete the reconnaissance that her unit had been sent to complete and had left incomplete when they decided a variable wasn't worth waiting for. She moved along the western fence line, using the shadow cast by the generator housing as cover. The generator was louder than she'd expected, which worked in her favor. Sound discipline became less critical next to a diesel engine running at capacity. The first guard post between her and the communications building had 1 man. She watched him for 8 minutes. He was bored. His patrol had the rhythm of a man, counting the time until his shift ended, not the rhythm of a man who expected anything to happen. That was the posture of a garrison that had been told, repeatedly, that no threat was coming from this direction. She went past him in the 3-second window when he turned east toward the gate. The communications building had 2 operators inside. She could see them through the window, both at their stations, one actively working, one who had tilted his chair back at an angle that suggested he was closer to asleep than not. She studied them for 90 seconds. Then she went in through the side door. The active operator registered her presence first. She was already moving when he registered it, and the gap between his recognition and his response was exactly as long as she needed it to be. The sleeping one came awake to the sound of the first one going down and didn't fully complete the transition before she was across the room. Both down, not dead. She'd been deliberate about that. She'd made the choice the same way she made every choice in the field. Quickly and then completely, without revisiting it. She sat down at the primary terminal and began working. Getting onto the coalition frequency took 4 minutes. The equipment wasn't the same as what she'd trained on, but close enough that the logic transferred. She found the transmission band, checked signal strength, 2 bars, not great, enough, and keyed to transmit. She gave her call sign. She gave her unit designation and mission number. She gave coordinates. She gave vehicle count, security configuration, communications equipment assessment. She gave the updated perimeter footprint. She spoke for 3 minutes and 40 seconds without stopping, because she had cataloged everything she'd seen with the particular precision of someone who had been told her entire career that her instincts needed to be verified by someone else's confidence, and had spent 6 years proving that the instincts didn't need verification. The duty officer on the other end came back after 11 seconds of silence. Who authorized this transmission? I did, she said. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance, 3rd Special Reconnaissance, and I'm inside the target facility right now. You can verify my unit designation, or you can write this down. Your choice. He wrote it down. She signed off and moved. She had the layout memorized from the briefing imagery and from the 30 minutes she'd spent at the tree line adjusting for the discrepancies. The depot's operational nerve center was in the northern building, the one with the reinforced roof and the 3 separate vehicle access points. That was where the coordination happened. That was where the targeting data for the supply chains lived. That was where Zollner's reconnaissance had been supposed to go, before he'd decided his variable wasn't worth the time. She'd spent 6 minutes in the communications room. She had maybe 10 more before someone noticed the operators weren't checking in. She moved north. She was 60 meters from the operations building when the 2nd patrol crossed her path. Not the scheduled rotation. A response patrol, 2 men moving with purpose, heading toward the communications building. Someone had noticed faster than she'd projected. She let them pass within 12 feet of her and held completely still against the exterior wall of the fuel storage building. The sound of her breathing was inside her own skull. The sound of their boots was right there. She counted their steps until they faded. Then she moved faster. The operations building had a single entry point on the south face. She took the guard at the door with the specific economy of someone who had drilled the motion more times than she could count, who had moved past performing it, and into something closer to reflex. He went down clean. She was inside before his radio finished its interrupted transmission. The operations room was larger than she'd expected. Map tables, 3 terminals, a wall display that showed a logistics network, rendered in glowing lines and color-coded nodes. She stood in the doorway for 2 full seconds and looked at it, because what was on that wall was not the logistical picture of a single depot's operations. It was a network map, 4 separate distribution chains, 23 named contacts, a timeline running across the bottom of the display, with windows marked in red. She pulled the small digital recorder from her field kit. It was the size of a thumb drive. She'd been carrying it for 2 deployments because her first intelligence officer had said, "When you are inside a target facility, you photograph everything you cannot carry, and you carry everything you can." She photographed the wall. She photographed the map tables. She photographed every terminal screen. She worked for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and when she was done, she had documentation that every analyst she'd ever worked with would have spent 6 months trying to obtain through conventional means. She was backing toward the door when she heard him. He had come in through the vehicle entrance on the north side, the one she hadn't been watching. He was not a soldier, not a guard. He was the kind of man who doesn't walk into a room, who occupies it, who treats every space he enters as already belonging to him. She'd seen that walk before. She'd seen it in commanders who'd never been wrong and in men who'd never been told no, and in the particular combination of both that produced people like this. His name, she would learn later, was Reuben, not a rank in the conventional military structure, something adjacent, a coordinator, the kind of man who made sure the network on that wall kept running. He looked at her across the room. She looked at him. Neither of them moved for 3 seconds. Then he reached for the radio on the table, and she crossed the room in exactly the time it took him to close his hand around it. She had the radio. She had the door at her back. She had a recorder full of intelligence that was worth more than anything she could have put in a body bag. "Don't," she said. He looked at her, really looked. The way people look when they're revising their understanding of what they're seeing. She'd gotten that look before. She was accustomed to the particular sequence of it, the initial assessment, the recalculation, and then the moment where the person decided whether to be afraid or angry or something else. He chose something else. He chose interested. "What unit?" he said. His English was precise, formal, the English of someone who had learned it deliberately. She didn't answer. "You're alone," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't confirm or deny. She kept the door at her back and the room between them, and she did the math she always did. What do I have? What do I need? What is the first step? What she had was documentation, a recorder, and the intelligence that the network on that wall existed and that someone with the access level to stand in that room had been coordinating it. What she needed was out. What the first step was keeping this man from reaching any other radio in the next 60 seconds. He seemed to understand some portion of her calculation, not all of it. Enough. "Your people left," he said. "I monitored the extraction." He paused. "Why are you still here?" She thought about that answer honestly, the way she thought about every answer when she had time to think. Not because the question deserved honesty, because the answer was true and the truth was the cleanest version. "Because I wasn't finished," she said. Something moved across his face. Not respect, not yet, but the antechamber of it. She needed one more thing before she moved. She needed confirmation. She'd seen the network. She'd documented the timeline. But she didn't know the next red window on that display, the one marked 48 hours out. She didn't know what it meant. "The window," she said. "48 hours, what is it?" He said nothing. "I already transmitted your facility's coordinates," she said, "and the network map and your distribution timeline. Whatever you're protecting inside that 48-hour window, the people who need to know about it already have a head start. So you can tell me now, or you can let me find out the way I find out everything else." She paused. "I've been moving through your facility for 40 minutes and nobody noticed. You do the math." He held her gaze for 4 seconds. She counted. "Resupply convergence," he said. 4 chains, 1 location, he paused. 300 kilometers south. Every major shipment for the next quarter, coordinated to arrive inside a 6-hour window. A convergence. Not an attack, a supply consolidation. The kind of event that, if disrupted, didn't just interrupt one chain. It collapsed 4 simultaneously. She filed it, all of it, tied it to the documentation on the recorder. Then she looked at him and said, "Sit down." He sat. She went out the north vehicle entrance, because it was the direction no one expected, and because the patrol she'd been tracking had gone back toward the communications building. She moved south along the depot's exterior fence, using the fuel storage building as cover, and she was 200 meters into the jungle when the base alarm went off behind her. She didn't stop. She adjusted. The alarm meant she had approximately 15 minutes before a response patrol reached the perimeter and another 20 before anyone organized a search pattern. It also meant the coalition frequency she'd used was going to be pulled, which meant any follow-up transmission she needed to make had to happen in the next 12 minutes. She pulled the recorder. She pulled the backup radio she'd taken from the operations room, the one she'd lifted off the table before Reuben had reached it. She found the coalition frequency and keyed in. "Control, this is Vance, 3rd Special Recon, 2nd transmission. I have additional intelligence. Recording follows." She played the recorder into the radio. Every photograph she'd taken had an audio log attached, her own voice narrating what she was seeing as she shot each frame. She'd done that automatically. Protocol. The same protocol she'd been following for 6 years, even when nobody was checking whether she followed it. The duty officer came back after 40 seconds. "Vance, we need to verify your authorization level for this class of intelligence." She thought about what to say to that. She thought about Zolnir and the word variable, and the 8 months she'd spent on her current deployment, being the person who was told her assessments needed secondary confirmation before they went up the chain. She thought about the first time she'd qualified at the range and the instructor who checked target twice. "My authorization level," she said, "is that I'm the only American inside that facility right now, and I've been doing your job for the last 40 minutes. You can verify my authorization, or you can act on the intelligence. But that convergence window is 48 hours out, so make a choice." A pause, 12 seconds. She counted. "Copy that, Vance. Stand by." She did not stand by, she moved. The extraction point that Zolnir had used was compromised. She knew that. Whatever had set up the ambush at the river crossing had known that point, which meant she needed a different one. She pulled the paper map and found the secondary extraction marker. 12 kilometers south. 12 kilometers of jungle, and a shoulder that had been relocated an hour ago and was starting to make its opinions known again. She started walking. She was 6 kilometers out when she heard the helicopter. Not extraction. Wrong direction, wrong frequency on the engine, the sound of a depot search pattern, 2 aircraft running a grid. She went to ground, pressed flat under the canopy, and waited while they swept the area twice. They didn't find her. She was, as she'd been for 6 years, very good at not being found when not being found was the objective. She was 3 kilometers from the extraction point when her radio crackled. Vance, this is Colonel Artis, Joint Intelligence. I need you to confirm what you've transmitted. She had never spoken to a colonel directly in the field. That was not the natural flow of information. A staff sergeant did not typically find herself on a direct channel with a Joint Intelligence colonel at 0300 hours in the middle of a jungle. Confirmed, she said. I have the original recording. I have documentation of a 4-chain logistics network, 23 contact designations, a 48-hour convergence window, and the facility coordinates for Depot 7's actual operational footprint, which is larger than the intelligence assessment by approximately 40%. A pause on the line. How did you get inside that facility? My unit extracted, she said. I didn't. Another pause. This one longer. Are you currently mobile? Yes, what's your status? She thought about the honest answer. She thought about the word functional and the particular truth it contained. Functional, she said. Artis came back in 9 seconds. We're redirecting an extraction asset to your secondary point.
40 minutes.
Vance. She looked at the canopy above her, at the faint gray that meant dawn was working its way through the cloud cover. Yes, whatever you pulled out of that facility. You need to know that we've been trying to locate that network for 7 months. 7 months. And you got it in 40 minutes. She didn't say anything. She was thinking about a wall display with 23 names on it, about a convergence window 48 hours out, about what disrupting a 4-chain logistics consolidation did to the operational capacity of everything it fed. She was thinking about Zolnir and the word variable, and about the particular mathematics of being written off. She was going to have thoughts about that, thoughts that required more than a radio channel in a jungle at 0300 to fully process. Later, she said, the extraction helicopter arrived at 0341 hours. The crew chief who came down the ramp looked at her shoulder and then at her face, and then did the rapid internal calculation of a combat medic who has seen a lot and knows what functional actually means versus what it looks like. He sat her down and started working without preamble. The field hospital at the forward operating base was a controlled efficiency. She lost some time after the intake. Not unconscious, the medicated version of conscious where things happen around you and register without fully connecting. She heard fracture and dislocation, and frostbite is not the word they used. Exposure was what they said, along with dehydration and the phrase "you are very lucky to be here" that she noted and set aside. She woke up fully at 1100 hours. She knew it was 1100 because she looked for a clock. First thing, always the first thing. Colonel Artis was in the chair next to her bed. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice, the kind of younger that makes you realize you've been picturing authority as older than it actually is. Staff Sergeant Vance, he said. Sir, she said, and tried to sit up. Don't, he said. Not yet. She assessed. Her shoulder was immobilized. Her arm was in a proper sling. The dislocation had apparently been the secondary injury. The primary, which she'd been managing without fully acknowledging, was 2 cracked ribs from the river crossings, which the medic had found when she'd inhaled during intake in a way that made him stop and recalibrate. The recorder, she said. Our analysts have had it since 0430, he said. The convergence window. We're running a full operation against it. He paused. 23 contact designations. 4 we already knew. 19 we didn't. He leaned forward slightly. The facility map you documented. There's a node on the secondary network that's been dark for 11 months. We'd marked it as possibly inactive. His voice shifted. It's not inactive. Your photos show its communication signature active inside the past 60 days. We have a location now. She let that land. An 11-month gap in their intelligence picture, closed in 40 minutes by a staff sergeant who'd been left in the water. She thought about that. She thought about Zolnir's voice on the radio. Variable lost. What happened to my unit, she said. Artis looked at her. They extracted clean. Tran is in surgery. Prognosis is good. The rest are accounted for. He paused. Lieutenant Zolnir filed his after-action at 0600. She waited. He reported you as missing, presumed dead. Ambush conditions, high water crossing, non-survivable without full extraction support. He classified the mission as a partial failure. Intelligence objective not achieved. Artis paused. He was wrong on both counts. Yes, she said. He also didn't know you'd made contact, she said. He didn't know about the transmission. He filed a failed mission report based on incomplete information. That's one way to describe it, Artis said. His voice had a particular precision that told her he was choosing his words carefully. There's going to be a review. The after-action discrepancy alone requires it. The ambush positioning also requires it. She looked at him. The ambush positioning, she said. We have reason to believe the ambush at the river crossing was not opportunistic. The patrol routes for your unit's infiltration were logged 42 hours before the mission. We believe those routes were accessed and transmitted by someone with internal authorization. He held her gaze. Someone on your fob. Who had your mission timeline? She felt something go very still inside her. Not the stillness before a shot. Something slower and colder. The ambush had been waiting for them. She'd known something was wrong from the birds, from the precision of the incoming fire. She'd attributed it to a competent opposing element with good intelligence. She hadn't extended the chain far enough back. She'd stopped at the opposing element and not asked who had given them the timeline. She asked now, "Do you have a name?" "We have a profile," he said. "We're 48 hours from physical confirmation." He paused, and the pause had weight. "The profile includes communication patterns that overlap with your unit's internal network." He set the tablet on her tray table, turned it face down. On the back of it, taped, was a single piece of paper with a name written in block letters. She looked at the name. She had worked alongside this person for 11 months. She had trusted this person with details that she wouldn't have shared if she'd known the details were being shared further. She had defended this person once, early in the deployment, when a senior NCO had questioned their judgment, and she'd said in a briefing room, in front of people who would remember it, that this person was reliable, that their read on field conditions was one of the better ones in the unit. She read the name again. "Zolnir," she said. Artie said nothing. He didn't need to. The particular stillness of that settled onto her the way all the night's weight had been settling since the helicopter landed. Not grief in the simple sense. The more specific weight of understanding that a shape you'd been reading as solid had been hollow the entire time, that the load it appeared to carry had always been falling somewhere it shouldn't, and that you'd been the one standing underneath it. "I want to be there," she said. "When you move." Artis looked at her, at the shoulder, at the ribs, at the face of a woman who had navigated a hostile facility for 40 minutes on a dislocated shoulder and documented an 11-month intelligence gap, and then walked 12 kilometers through a jungle before allowing herself to stop. "I'll clear it with your surgeon," he said. He stood. She stopped him. "The convergence window," she said, 48 hours. "We're moving in 36, he said, "with what you gave us." She looked at the ceiling after he left. She thought about 23 names on a wall display. She thought about 4 supply chains that were not going to complete their convergence. She thought about the FAB 12 kilometers north, where Zolnir had filed his paperwork and marked her column closed. She thought about the particular freedom of being a variable that nobody was watching. The surgeon was a captain named Ellison, who had the specific energy of a person who had been asked many unreasonable things and had developed a protocol for assessing them on a case-by-case basis. He stood at the foot of her bed with her chart and looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "You're asking me to clear you for mobility in 48 hours. For a limited capacity," she said. "I need to be present for an apprehension. I'm not asking for field clearance." He looked at the rib assessment. He looked at the shoulder immobilization. He looked at her face, which was the face of someone who had already decided, and was going through the appropriate channels as a formality. 48 hours, he said. "Wheelchair or crutch, someone with you. And if your pain goes above a 6, you tell that person immediately, and you sit down." "Understood," she said. He left. She reached for the tablet Artis had left, turned it over, and looked at the intelligence network display he'd pulled up before departing. 23 nodes, 19 of them new. One of them, a node that had been marked dark for 11 months, now confirmed active with a physical location. She had given them that. A staff sergeant working alone on a dead radio with a dislocated shoulder had given them that. She thought about every room she'd walked into where the first thing she'd had to establish was that she belonged there. Every qualification score that had been double-checked, every recommendation that had been filed, and then had quietly not materialized. Every time someone had used the word variable in a tone that meant interchangeable, replaceable, expendable. She thought about the specific architecture of being underestimated, the way it was built, brick by brick, from small decisions made by people who never had to account for the cumulative load. She thought about 48 hours. She thought about what came after. The room was a standard military briefing space. Table, chairs, whiteboard, two military police by the wall. Colonel Artis at the head of the table. She stood at the other end on a crutch, her shoulders still immobilized, her ribs making themselves known with every full breath. She'd learned to breathe at 3/4. It was enough. Zollner came in flanked. He looked at her across the room, and she watched him do what people do when they're caught. The rapid interior inventory, the search for a remaining play, the assessment of how much she knew. He was good at reading faces. He'd always been good at that. It was what had made him seem like a perceptive officer and what had actually made him useful to the people he'd been working for. He read her face now and found nothing to work with. She gave him the same attention she gave a ranging target. Present, clear, completely beyond anything he could use. Lieutenant Zollner, Artis said. His voice had the level procedural quality of a man who has done this before and knows that calm is the most destabilizing thing in the room. We're going to go through the communication record. You'll have an opportunity to respond to each item. Zollner looked at Artis, then at her. She said nothing. She didn't need to say anything. She had said everything she needed to say 40 minutes. Inside a target facility in the middle of the night, into a recorder, into a radio, into a wall display that had told her something nobody had thought to look for in 11 months. She was there because she had earned the right to be there, not because anyone had given it to her, because she had gone back into the jungle when a variable was supposed to stay lost. Zollner tried at the end of it, the version where his motives were complicated, where the intelligence had been bad for months and nobody was listening, and the operation was going to produce casualties no matter what he did. The version where selling the patrol route had been a calculated containment, not a betrayal. She listened to all of it. She let it finish. Then she said, Corporal Tran lost the full use of her left hand. The room was very quiet. She said it the same way she said everything that mattered, without elaboration, without qualification. The way facts are stated when they are sufficient on their own. Zollner said nothing after that. Artis handled the rest. She was in the room for 40 more minutes, and at the end of those 40 minutes, when they took Zollner out and the door closed behind him, she stood on her crutch in the particular silence of a completed equation and felt the weight of the last 4 days settle onto her all at once. Artis moved to stand beside her, not speaking, just present. She'd noticed that about him. He knew when a space needed filling and when it needed to be left alone. What happens to the network, she said, after the convergence operation? He looked at her. The 4 chains fold, he said. Without the consolidation, their distribution capacity drops by roughly 60% for the next quarter. After that, it depends on whether the 19 new contacts we identified can be rolled up before they rebuild structure. He paused. That work is going to take months. She nodded. She was looking at the empty chair. I want to be part of it, she said. He didn't say anything immediately. She'd learned that about him too. He didn't fill silence with placeholder words. He waited until he had something real. There's going to be a review of your unit's command structure, he said, given the investigation findings, given the after-action discrepancy. There will be personnel changes. He looked at her steadily. There's also a billet that's been open in my section for 4 months. Reconnaissance intelligence integration. It requires someone who can work inside a target environment and produce analysis-grade output in the field. His voice was precise and neutral. I reviewed 6 months of personnel files this week. Your assessments have been flagged as requiring secondary confirmation every single time they went up the chain. He paused. I pulled the confirmation notes. Your assessments were right. Every time. The secondary confirmations were right, about 63%. She let that land. She let all of it land. The numbers and what the numbers meant about all the time that had been spent on verification that the work hadn't required. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the clean version and the true version. And whether they were the same thing. They were the same thing. I'll take the billet, she said. He nodded once. Her surgeon clears her, he said, mostly to himself, because the decision was already made and they both knew it, and she'd be read into the operation by end of week. She looked at the room one more time, at the empty chair, at the whiteboard with nothing written on it. She thought about the convergence window. 36 hours from now, 4 supply chains were going to arrive at a single point and find something waiting for them that wasn't what they'd planned for. 19 contacts they hadn't known about were going to learn that 11 months of operational security had produced a single night's documentation by a staff sergeant who'd been left in the water. She thought about an analyst somewhere, going through a recorder, Photograph by photograph. Finding 23 names on a wall display. Finding the location of a node that had been dark for 11 months. Finding the thread of something larger that she had pulled by simply refusing to stop when the people around her had decided she already had. She walked out of the room under her own power. The crutch was a concession to the ribs, not the shoulder. The shoulder was fine. The shoulder had been fine since the mangrove root. She'd been fine. She'd been fine the entire time, in every room, on every radio, at every point where someone had looked at her and run the wrong calculation. They had called her a variable. She had come back with the network.